On today's episode of the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast, I'm talking with Dirk Downing, a mental performance coach who helps people zone in and eliminate all the distractions and pressure and noise so that they can perform at their peak, whether that's on the golf course or in the course of life. I hope you get a lot of valuable tips out of this episode, and if you do enjoy it, please subscribe to our podcast so you get notified of future episodes. And now, on to the show.
You're listening to the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast with Dr. Dave Candy, St. Louis's leading expert in chronic pain relief. Dr. Candy specializes in helping women age 40 and above to overcome chronic, nagging aches and pains without medication, injections, or surgery, so they can stay active, mobile, healthy, and independent. Whether you're suffering from pain yourself or know someone who is, pain's a universal experience that affects us all, but that doesn't mean you have to suffer. Knowledge is power, and having the right information can help you or someone you love get on the road to recovery. On the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast, Dr. Candy talks with other pain experts from around the world to give you the information you need to recover, the peace of mind of knowing that you're not alone, and the hope that lasting relief from chronic pain is possible, and it doesn't require relying on pills, injections, or surgery in order to do so. So sit back, relax, and open your ears, mind, and heart, and let the healing begin.
Welcome to the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dave Candy. I have with me here today Dr. Dirk Downing. He is a mental performance coach and owner of Zoning In Peak Performance. He also has a PhD in sports psychology, and he helps people zone in and perform better in golf as well as just in life, in everyday life. So thank you for joining us here today, Dirk, and I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us a bit about what you do.
All right, Dave, thank you so much for having me on. I'm thrilled to be here. So yeah, like you said, I'm a mental performance coach, and I specialize in working with people in the one-on-one capacity. I work with a lot of golfers by trade, but I also work with other athletes and other performers. I've recently stepped into the business realm, and I've worked with entrepreneurs as well. And not only do I work with individuals, but I also work with teams, and it's all geared towards optimizing your performance, getting the most out of training, and enjoying your sport or your performance a little bit more.
Wonderful. And, can you tell us a little bit about, how you got your training and how you got into this?
A little bit about me. I grew up, as kind of a competitive athlete, especially with golf. I was a junior golfer growing up, and kind of you asked me before the age of 16, my default answer for all the relatives was, I'm going to be on the PGA Tour. And so I was really living it. I was loving the pursuit and the drive, and it's a good opportunity for me to spend time with my dad and my brother. A lot of times, a lot of good memories out on the golf course. A lot of tough memories too. I put a lot of pressure on myself as a kid, and I had this build up idea in my mind of what it took to be great. I'd often emulate Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson, some of the elite golfers of those times, and I would try to adopt these mentalities that were maybe different than my personality. And after a lot of hard work and not seeing the ultimate results I wanted, I don't want to downplay. I was a decent junior golfer. I led my high school team, but I had these aspirations to do great things on the golf course. And in these big moments, I would a lot of times underperform, and not just unlucky breaks here and there. It was significantly worse than what I thought I was capable of. And knowing what I know now about the mental game, my education, my work with golfers of all levels and other elite athletes, is that I was kind of going about it the wrong way. I was trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. And by going about it in a smarter, kind of more efficient way, I think I would have had a better chance, and I probably would have enjoyed it a little bit more. But luckily, all those trials and tribulations have really prepared me for what I do now. And I feel really lucky. But real quick, before I get into my mental performance coaching business and the clients I work with now, real quick about my education. So I went to Mizzou for 9 years. It was a blast. But I spent 5 years in the Masters and PhD program in sports psychology. And I got the undergrad in psychology, and I didn't, quite know what I wanted to do with it. And I discovered that Mizzou was one of the greatest places to study sports psychology in the country, because the director of our program at the time, Dr. Rick McGuire, who's a legend in the field, he was the former track and field coach at Mizzou. So we got to study under him and learn a lot, but more importantly, and not more importantly, but very importantly, we got an opportunity to work with the teams at Mizzou, because these other coaches already had buy-in and trust with the track coach, because he had been around for so long. And a lot of other reputable sports psych programs around the country, to get that applied experience, which is really kind of the art and the essence of what we do, the ability to say similar things and translate the language to different personalities, to different skill sets. That's really kind of where you make your living. And we got a lot of opportunity to practice that skill set because we got to work with the teams at Mizzou. And so I was fortunate enough, I got to work with the women's golf team for 3.5 years, the men's golf team for 2 years, and the women's soccer team for 2 years. And one of those semesters, I actually stepped in as the assistant coach on the women's golf team for a time being, because the assistant coach took a leave of absence because she was pregnant. So it was a phenomenal experience. I learned a lot in the classroom, but I learned probably more on the golf course in working with these elite athletes and these elite coaches. And so fast forward, to 2017, I opened up my business and I started working a lot with mainly high school golfers. And since then, my practice has, expanded a lot, and I'm working with groups of people. I've taken on college teams. I've also stepped into the business realm a little bit recently, and I've worked with entrepreneurs who are, working on similar things that athletes work on, as far as being productive, staying motivated, and staying on task. It's easy to let your attention and your focus deviate, especially these days when things are a little bit more uncertain. So that's a little bit about me. That's gotten me to where I am today, and thrilled about the future.
Well, it sounds like you've got some great background. Now, can you tell us a little bit, when you were working with some of those sports teams, I imagine there were injuries and people coming back from injuries, and even your current clients. How does the psychology affect someone who maybe wants to get back to golf or wants to get back to some other sport, but they're either afraid or they just can't do it because an injury is keeping them from doing that?
Yeah, Dave, that's a great question, and I guess the first kind of story that comes to mind is in my experience in working with the soccer team at Mizzou. And so just to kind of paint the picture a little bit, a lot of these girls were stars of their community going, and they were just the best player, and they, got to go to a Division I school. And so they get there, and there's issues of playing time because you're kind of around everybody else who's elite. So even without the injury, there's that issue of it's different than how it has always been for me my whole life, because I've always been the star. I've always gotten all the playing time I want. I've gotten to play whatever position I want. And now I'm around a bunch of people that are just like me, maybe even better. So there's that, but you get to school and you're, 18 years old, and you're away from home for the first time. And if that injury pops up your freshman year, which I got a firsthand look at a lot of these girls and how they had to deal with it. It's really tough, not only from like a mental standpoint as far as your game, but let's first get into the identity piece of this. So you go and you start to bond with your teammates, and then halfway through the year, you get injured, and your teammates are all traveling to the next set of matches, and you're stuck at home with 4 or 5 other players that didn't make the traveling squad. So this whole culture, this whole family that you're around is kind of stripped of you during that time. And so that's tough for an 18-year-old who's away from home, that doesn't, the family that they came to see, their team, kind of left them. So then kind of as they work to recover, something they were highly skilled at and confident in is all of a sudden something that's, kind of taken away as well. And and a lot of these explosive movements they need to make, it's hard to trust that. And so they're having to scale it back. They're having to do, consistent exercises to strengthen, the injury. And it's a tough process. And I think if you're not mentally strong, you can really delay that time that it takes you to recover. And then throughout the whole process, there's always curveballs where sometimes you feel like it's going really well one day, and then the next day it's tough, and then if you're playing in practice and you trust it, but then it hurts and then your performance suffers. It's not just about the fact that it hurts, but it's about the fact that you're not performing well too. So there's a lot of issues at stake there. But luckily, if we train our mind, the way we recover from an injury is very similar to the way we would go after our maximum performance. It's this ability to overcome distraction, to maximize your current moment, and to get the most out of things. So that's definitely the perspective I had kind of first pop in my mind was the experience of these freshman soccer players that really struggled, and for a lot of reasons.
Now, for someone who's maybe older, you mentioned you work with some business people and entrepreneurs, and I think you mentioned even some retired groups now. Someone who necessarily didn't have an injury, but maybe they just have a chronic nagging pain that is keeping them off the golf course. How do you help with that from a mental perspective?
Yeah, so I think when you're not able to do something you love because of an injury, it's really easy to feel like you're kind of static and you're not really moving forward. And so establishing things to accomplish, clear-cut goals daily, weekly, is very important. And I would argue it's almost more important than when you're able-bodied, because this feeling of building competency, of improving a little bit every day, is something that's really vital for motivation. And when you're on a sports team, when you're pursuing something at a high level and you're able-bodied, you're getting a steady dose of this leveling up feeling that you get a little bit every day. And when you're injured and you don't have clear-cut goals, things that you're trying to accomplish, sometimes it can feel like you're kind of flatlined and you're not moving anywhere, and that can have a horrible impact on your motivation. So even if it's a set number of reps in the gym of strengthening the muscle or whatever, or a certain amount of exercise, a certain drill that you're able to do with no pain, scaling it down. If you can establish clear-cut goals every day, every week, and you can essentially check those boxes off, and you slowly increase those goals each week, each day, that's going to have a huge impact on your buy-in, and you're gonna get more out of each workout, and you're going to recover faster.
So you've got this ultimate goal of, either being able to get back on the golf course, say, or being able to get back to your peak performance. But then you're saying kind of setting small incremental goals along the way helps keep people motivated?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's one thing I would definitely recommend. Having this big goal doesn't happen every day. And so if you only think about the big goal, then each day you're working on it, it doesn't feel like you're doing anything because you haven't accomplished the big goal. We kind of call that, outcome motivation of what's going to happen way down the road. But if we can establish these goals, kind of these intrinsic goals of the moment, I'm going to stay focused for 30 minutes today during this workout. And every time my attention deviates, I'm going to slowly shift it back to the present moment. I'm going to focus on my breathing. I'm going to focus how my body feels. These are goals that you can control every day. And it, might not feel as great as getting back on the field, but it's way better than kind of going through the motions every day and doing similar things. And kind of gets into another thing that I work on with athletes that are recovering from injury, similar to the elite athletes that are maximizing their performance, is how do you control your focus? How do you maximize each moment? How do you stay in the moment when all these distractions are pulling you and you're like, I'm not connected with my team. I'm not playing to the best of my ability. This thing that I was really good at is not with me right now. So controlling your focus and thinking productively requires you to build up your mental skills. And so with my clients, we look at specific times where their mind tends to wander, and we develop specific strategies during those times to keep the mind back on track. And we treat them like skills because that's kind of what they are. It's not going to happen overnight where, I meet with someone and then the next day they have the most productive workout they've ever had. It's one of those things where, maybe this workout, your attention deviated 20 times to the negative of why am I here? Why did I get screwed over? But maybe the next workout, it could be 16 times, and then 12 times, and then 8 times. And eventually you're just getting a lot more productivity and you're feeling better in the process. One of the most rewarding things, even when you are able-bodied, is to be able to zone in the moment and play to the best of your ability or perform to the best. We call that flow state in sports psychology, where you action and awareness merge and you're so engrossed in the present moment that you can't even kind of feel the perception of time on the clock. It can speed up or it can slow down. And that's a sweet spot. And we can't always make that happen for sure, but we can definitely make it happen more often if we learn about it and we learn the core traits of it and we train it every day.
That's an incredible skill to be able to zone in like that. I can see how when you're focused on this big overarching goal, it could be easy to get, frustrated or depressed when you're not getting there. And, you mentioned about people's minds wandering and like getting distracted from the present moment. A lot of the patients that I see with chronic pain, they have trouble with that, especially at night. Their mind wanders and it keeps them from sleeping. And, it's like they just can't shut it off. Do you have any tips for someone who might be trying to get better sleep, but they just can't get their mind to stop replaying all the what ifs or, what happened or what might happen? How do they zone in, so to speak?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And it kind of leads to what I was just talking about. I always think of, so the concept of flow is kind of when you have a performance, you're so zoned in, you can't feel the perception of time. It's a great feeling. Mindfulness is kind of like a cousin to flow. And it's something where you can zone in on the present moment, you zone in on your breathing, sensory perceptions, but there's no performance. And I always think of like the Buddhist monk, who sits down for 8 hours focusing on their breathing, his or her breathing, and then all of a sudden the 8 hours is up and maybe to them it felt like 30 minutes. And we can build our ability to be mindful through doing various exercises. And it's not always just breathing and mindful exercises. I'm a big believer in like yoga from a mental standpoint of just the fact that you're spending this time to work on your breathing, or if you go on a slow walk around your neighborhood and you focus on your breathing. But going back to the room where you're up at night and you got your thoughts wandering, one of the biggest things I would recommend if you haven't ever done any mindfulness is spend 10 minutes just focusing on your breathing. And for me, I try to get real specific with it. So I try to feel the air kind of as it's coming down, as my lungs are expanding and then as I'm exhaling. And I really zone in on that feeling. And what they'll tell you about mindfulness is that you're going to have wandering thoughts pop in. And for a lot of type A personalities, they want to make sure they're doing it right, quote unquote, air quotes here. Mindfulness is about recognizing these thoughts are going to pop in, but we're not judging the thoughts. We're saying, I'm a human being. I'm bound to have a distracting thought pop up. And what I always use, the metaphor I use, is you imagine these distractions as just little people trying to bother you, tapping you on the shoulder. And you turn to them and you accept the fact that you got distracted, but you don't necessarily consider what the little voice is saying. You're just like, hey, I got distracted. You turn to the little voice. You say, hey, I see you there, but I got to get back to work. You don't really say this out loud, but that's kind of the metaphor. And then you slowly shift your mind back to your breathing. And the idea is over time, eventually the little voice quits bothering you as much, and you get more locked in. And then all of a sudden, 10 minutes on a Monday, if you've worked on it for 2 weeks, that the Monday 2 weeks later, 10 minutes is going to feel a lot faster for you because you're going to be that much more equipped mentally to kind of get into that moment. And then that that has a huge impact on your ability to relax. It lowers your heart rate. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this have heard of progressive relaxation strategies, where you kind of imagine your feet falling asleep. You work your way up to your ankles, then your knees, then your waist, all the way up to your head. And the process takes 5 or 10 minutes. But if you do it well, the act of like narrowing your focus to a specific sensation has a very calming impact on our mind. When we are caught up at night, or when we're too amped up for a performance, we often think from thoughts, like a lot of thoughts kind of in sequential order, like really fast. Like, what do I have to do tomorrow? That means I have to get up at this time. Well, I got to make sure I call this person, got to make sure I get a workout in. So it's a bunch of thoughts that kind of escalate. And mindfulness is about really zoning in on one thought. I think a lot of times when people are worried about falling asleep, they're like, why can't I just get this stuff out of my mind? Like kind of like trying to block it out. And actually the mind doesn't really turn off. So to combat that, we just have to give ourselves simple, of the moment, very narrow focused thoughts that actually has that really relaxing impact on us.
Thank you for those tips. I've in recent years become a huge advocate of breathing. Never realized what just a big impact that has. And I'm sure there's tons of studies showing, all kinds of positive impacts, from, decreased pain sensitivity to more relaxation, calming depression. Breathing's huge. So, but learning how to do it right and learning how to focus in and be mindful with it is a tough skill to learn. And it sometimes takes a coach like yourself to be able to do that right. Now, for someone who's either recovering from pain or recovering from an injury, or just really wants to improve their performance, how much do external factors, not the pain or the injury itself, but like relationships, businesses they're in, job situations, finances, how much do those come in and impact either their recovery or their performance? And what can you do to combat that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess the place to start would be, I believe that the mind is habit forming. And so if you have a stressor, a type of thought that's pulling you externally away from the moment, and not by choice, but we're all human, we have those thoughts pop up. If you start letting it become a habit, your mind is very used to like, oh, here we go again. I'm going to go down this train, right? And so to combat that, we've got to be patient, and we've got to create these helpful, productive thoughts. We've got to train them up so that they become as loud, as equipped, as well-oiled as these negative, unproductive thoughts that have kind of happened sort of by habit. And so in those moments, similar to mindfulness, the mind can only really think one thought at a time. I said before, when we get stressed, when we get nervous, we think thoughts in rapid succession, but we're still kind of thinking them one at a time. So it takes this self-awareness to recognize, hey, is this thought productive that I'm having right now? And if it is, great. But if not, hey, I see you there. I got to get back to work. You're going to be there for me at the end of the day, or whatever, when I'm going to have time. But right now I'm performing. I've got to slowly shift my mind back to the relevant cues of the moment. And so there's these, and for every moment, it's a little different. In athletics, with golf, for example, there's so many different moments on the course. What are you thinking before you hit a shot? What are you thinking between shots? What are you doing as you warm up for the round? Even your morning routine before you leave your house or your apartment, what are you, how are you controlling those variables as well? So pre-performance routine, pre-shot routine, post-shot strategies, all things I work with on the golf course that would definitely apply to other realms of life as well. But that's where I'd love to, get very specific with the client and hear their day-to-day, so that I can help them tailor specific strategies so that they can start utilizing them. But in general, sometimes we're feeling down in the dumps, we're not motivated, and there's certain things that can get us quickly kind of back to the moment. And sports psychology, we call this self-talk. A lot of times people say productive or positive self-talk. I like to use the word productive self-talk. And because sometimes positive is just not really that realistic. And it doesn't mean you're going to be negative on yourself, but, when Serena Williams slams, and hits an ace, she's saying, come on, she's not being positive, but she's saying exactly what she needs to say in that moment to thrive. Or if she makes a bad mistake, she's saying stuff that locks her back in, that builds up her confidence. And it's a well-oiled thought that she's done for a long time. And so no matter what your performance is, there's places that we can go mentally that help us get back on track. Quick story, if we have time. Yeah, I was in a college and I had one of the most energetic roommates you could ever imagine, very extroverted guy. And it'd be the end of a long week and I was just mentally exhausted. I had several tests that week. And, my brother and I lived with him. We were, 3-person apartment. And so it'd be Friday and he'd get in the doors and he'd be like, fellas, let's go. In like a loud whisper, but all the hair on my skin would stand up and I'd be like, no matter how much I was tired before, I'm energized, I'm ready to go, I'm excited, I'm ready to hang out with my roommate Gabe. And so flash forward 3 years from that moment, I was training for a marathon. I was on the MKT trail. I was going to go run in Columbia, Missouri. I was going to go run 16 miles that day. And it was mile 11. And it was just that time where everything in my body was hurting. I was trying to convince myself, well, if I only go 11 today, how's that going to work with my training sequence? Can I figure out a way to quit early? All these bad thoughts we would say, And I remember Gabe, I remember let's go. And in those energetic moments I had in undergrad, sure enough, I saw the tree in the distance and I was like, you know what, I can get to that tree. And then I got to the tree and I was like, you know what, what's another couple miles? You know what, I'm really not even that tired right now. And so it had a profound impact on me. Not that I would prescribe everyone to say, let's go, but I would prescribe everyone to look internally, find those inside jokes, those memories that you have that give you energy, or sometimes we need to relax. So maybe you remember the calming moment, and that can have a profound impact as long as it's true to yourself. So that's kind of what a good, quick strategy without getting too specific.
Yeah, I mean, you think about people who are able to self-manage pain and focus in the moment. Marathon runners are just, they go beyond the capacities of what human beings should be able to achieve with their bodies. But, running 26 miles is not necessarily what the human body was designed to do, but it's certainly within its capabilities. And being able to, like you said, pick yourself up after that 11th mile or 20th mile and say, let's go, and, forget about the pain, block that out, release the chemicals from your brain that say, hey, this really isn't that important right now. You're not hurting all that much. You can go. And in fact, you're not even tired. It's a wonderful skill. But for people who weren't blessed with that intrinsic skill, like marathon runners, can you tell us a little bit about, what you would do to help someone develop those, and how someone would ultimately, start to work with you if they wanted to?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I would say in general, like my process with clients it's kind of front loaded with the psychoeducation, where we go through all the necessary theory that could apply. And then we get very tailored with it after a few sessions in. How is this specifically going to apply to your world? But I start with productive thinking. The right thoughts help performance, wrong thoughts hurt. For any given moment, we have the ability to choose these right thoughts. And this is the skill that we're building. We're building up our ability to think helpful thoughts. And on the flip side of that, it requires awareness. And so when I'm working with people, it's really important that they feel comfortable speaking about what's going on, because I have an expertise in sports psychology, and I've worked with hundreds of elite athletes, but they're the expert of their own mental game. And so for us, it's kind of a collaboration, and that's the fun part about my job. I kind of get to put on a detective hat, and maybe working with this specific client is a little different than anybody I've ever worked with before. And so it's a flexible approach in that regard. But we start with these mental skills. So self-talk is, one definitely that we've worked on. a lot of people don't even think they're really not very aware of their mental game at all. It's easy to say that they have a bad mental game, but then when I try to probe more, they don't really know how to describe it. So we talk about some basic stuff of like optimal level of arousal, for example, whereas for any given moment in a performance or before a performance, do you have enough energy to focus on all the relevant information to perform your best? Do you have so much energy that it's hard to focus on the relevant information because your mind wants to jump from all these thoughts? Imagine having too much caffeine in a day. It's kind of that feeling. You're too amped up. Golfers get first tee jitters all the time. Golf, the issue is that you have a lot of time, a lot of buildup, and even during the round, you have a lot of gaps, a lot of time for your mind to wander. And so thinking these thoughts in rapid succession definitely can elevate your heart rate and not allow your body to do the well-trained motion that you've worked on for so long. So not too high, not too low, just right on this optimal level of arousal. Maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is like seeing a bear in the wilderness and having a fight or flight response, what we call it in psychology. And then 1 to 2 is like getting out of bed. You're not ready to make a putt to win the Masters. So there's this sweet spot for every performance, for every performer. And we can train that. We can get there every day. If it's too high, we have ways to chill out, calm down. If it's too low, we have mental strategies to pick ourselves up. So these are the kind of conversations we have in the first few sessions. And then we get really applied, and I'm telling them things to work on when usually in their performance realm, whether it's on the golf course during a workout, and things of that nature. Another big skill that, I kind of assess before I go in a certain way. Some people come in and they have a pretty negative outlook on things, and positivity is huge when it comes to performance, when it comes to injury recovery, anything relating to the mental game. Kind of positivity is kind of the water and the sun that flourishes everything, that makes it all work. And so there's ways to train your skill of positivity, which a lot of people don't even think that's a skill. People are like, oh, you're either positive or negative. I always remember my grandpa was a very positive guy. And, but personally, and reading, Dr. Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology, it's kind of a new branch of psychology that started in the 1970s, where they started looking at like elite performers, athletes, CEOs, musicians, at those functioning at the top end of society, not only making a lot of money and being successful that way, but also feeling this well-being, this meaning, this contentment. What do these people have? What are they doing? How are they living? And how can we give this to everyone else to help people maximize? And so a lot of it has to do with, proactively approaching these positive thoughts and making it like a discipline and a habit, not something that's just going to happen to you randomly, that you're going to all of a sudden get positive. And so a great exercise is this 3 good things, which there's an app on your phone. It pops up for me every day at 5 p.m. But it's just reflecting on the day and recognizing, even on your worst days, if you're creative, you can think about a moment, even if it's a fun conversation you had for 5 minutes with someone, but you can remember the positive. And over time, this positivity ball, it has a snowball effect. And at first you're in a negative part of your life. You might realize, what am I going to write about today? And then you do the activity for 2 weeks and you're like, what am I going to write about? What am I going to pick? There's so many things. And it has this profound impact. You start recognizing way more positive things in your world, and it changes your whole outlook. And then when you're performing, you're just way more efficient because you have that positive outlook.
So kind of focusing on positivity, you're saying it brings about more positivity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Outstanding. So for someone who wants to either get back to the performance of life or perform better in their golf game, wants to have more positivity in their life, how would someone get a hold of you to get started working with you, or see if you're a good fit for a mental performance coach for them?
Absolutely. Yeah. So check out my website. It's zoninginppc.com, or you can shoot me an email at dirkmd23@gmail.com. You're also welcome to call my cell phone, 314-406-7658. I'd love to hear from anybody in any performance realm who's looking to kind of enjoy their performance more and perform better. I'm not telling people to be positive just because it's a good thing. I think I really do believe that it helps you perform better as well. So.
Well, thank you, Dirk. We'll get all those contact numbers and emails and websites in the show notes today. Any closing thoughts that you'd like to give listeners out there before we end the show?
Yeah, for those of you that are, maybe chalk up the mental game as something that is not really for you or doesn't really help. I would say, everybody has the ability to improve their mental game. I would argue that even, Tiger Woods in his heyday could have been even better. And so when we think about the mental game as something that you either have or you don't, we limit ourselves from being able to actually improve. And the mental game is something we're always like approaching mastery, but we never really get there because even the best mental athletes in the world have bad mental performances, so it's something where it requires you to know yourself, which is an ongoing process because you're always acquiring new experiences and more wisdom as you get older. And so you're constantly having to reflect on it. And so I would just say there's a lot of hope there's a lot of hope that you could have, because there's a lot of, I just personally as an athlete and with all the people that I've worked with, I've just seen so much improvement and so much ability to not only perform better, but to just find more meaning in your world. And so I wouldn't chalk it up to that's not for me. I think this stuff can help everyone. I know it has helped me a lot.
Well, outstanding. Well, thank you again for joining us today, Dirk. And if anyone wants to reach out, we'll have them get in touch.
All right, Dave. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you live in the St. Louis area and would like Dr. Candy's help to find a solution to your pain, visit our website at stlpainexpert.com. Email Dr. Candy at dave@stlpainexpert.com or call Dr. Candy's clinical practice, Movement for Life, at 314-941-3970. Movement for Life offers free consultations called discovery visits to people who are serious about discovering how they can relieve their pain and get back to the happy, healthy, and active lifestyle they deserve. If you're listening from outside the St. Louis area but would still like some help, feel free to contact us to learn more about our virtual health coaching. Regardless of where you live, please share our podcast with anyone you know who would benefit from learning more about pain and what can be done to relieve it. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or your other favorite podcast platform so you get notified when we release a new episode. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll enjoy us again soon.